All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, what a great drug dealer does is they make the people who buy the paraphernalia from them feel like they're friends or they're buddies. It's not just a business transaction. I also care about you. And we see that same dynamic between the so-called black man and woman and the super liberal Caucasian here in Western society, especially here in America. Well, what the super liberal Caucasian will tend to do is to try to make the so-called black male and female, but especially the so-called black male, believe that he should always resort to his emotions when it comes to evaluating what is going on in society around him. Because what the super liberal Caucasian knows is that by doing that, he will always ensure that the so-called black man remains a vassal to him and a servant of his. And that is what the quote-unquote drug dealer does with those who buy the product from him or her. They always want to make you feel like you need what they have to offer you. You cannot replace that sensation or that high anywhere else, especially in some way, shape, or form that's actually going to be lifting you up and constructing you and building you up rather than tearing you down incrementally. Now, the latest manifestation of a lot of super liberal nonsense, especially geared towards the so-called black man and woman, is this notion that the long dead singer Kate Smith, who sang her own rendition of quote-unquote God Bless America, should be struck from the public records, and her version of that song should no longer be played in stadiums because she also sang some quote-unquote racist songs back in the 20s and 30s and 40s, etc. Brothers, me personally, I really don't give a shit. I don't care about God Bless America. I don't care about Kate Smith. I don't care about the racist songs that she sang. Because at the end of the day, right now we're in 2019. We have to look forward as a people just as much as we look back. Our people are always prompted by the super liberal Caucasian to look back at things, and we should reflect on things, and we should be knowledgeable of history. There's no doubt about that. But what the super liberal Caucasian, especially the super liberal Caucasian Jew, what they want us to do is to only focus on things that really cannot be changed. So they try to push and promote gestures to allegedly appease the so-called black man and woman. And what that does is that keeps us in a vassal, a servant state of mind, as opposed to a ruling class mentality, which is what we need to have to hopefully avert many of the oncoming cataclysms that are going to affect this society on a social scale, economic scale, so on and so forth. But anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
So the Philadelphia Flyers have decided to take down a statue of Kate Smith, a singer from the 1930s, due to the revelation of some lyrics discovered from songs back in that time frame, published back in the 1930s. She's been singing, or rather a recording of her version of God Bless America has been playing at both Yankee Stadium and in Philadelphia at Flyers games for some years. And as you heard me mention, the Flyers also had a statue of Kate Smith out in front of her stadium that was at first covered up and now has been removed in the wake of the revelation of these lyrics.
Absolutely. I think that it was extremely important that the Philadelphia Flyers remove that statue of Kate Smith from in front of their stadium so that they no longer offend the 3 season ticket holders who happen to be black of the Philadelphia Flyers. That was very important, and that's going to help us as a people ascend to a higher level.
From the 1930s. Stephen A., is it fair to say this removal of the statue, the removal of the song God Bless America, her version from the libraries of both of these teams, is an overreaction?
Yes, it is an overreaction, but beyond an overreaction, it's a red herring that has been put forth in front of so-called black people by super liberal Caucasians. And brothers, we have to understand this. Everything is political. There's nothing that is done for a moral reason. Everything is done for political reasons, and everything political is corporate because we're living in a corporatocracy. So they have to sell things to so-called black people. Right now, on the quote-unquote left side, or the quote-unquote democratic side, or the quote-unquote liberal side, whatever you want to call it, progressive, any bullshit term that you want to use for cultural Marxism. Right now, they're scrambling because the 2-year-long Russia investigation on Donald Trump has proved to be fruitless. They're still trying to scrounge something up with that. And they know that as of right now, if they don't find some way to depose Donald Trump, he is going to get reelected or reselected. And if that happens, many people on the quote-unquote left side of the political paradigm, they might consider career suicide. Some of them might consider actual suicide. There are many people in this society today who are so depressed by what they believe Donald Trump represents that they're having quote-unquote suicidal thoughts or feelings rolling around in their head. Believe it or not. Especially many of these super liberal females, homosexuals, etc. Under the 2 terms of Barack Obama, the left side or the super liberal side, they really believed that they were moving forward towards a society that was going to be dominated on a base level, on a mass level, by women, homosexuals, and transgenders. And when Donald Trump was elected/selected to preside in the White House, that hurt them because the image of Trump has emboldened many people who are against those ideologies, particularly Caucasian people. Now so-called blacks, many so-called blacks are starting to understand that Donald Trump is nowhere near the boogeyman that has been presented to them by the mainstream media. And many so-called black people, especially so-called black men, are starting to just view Donald Trump as what he is, which is just another politician. Me personally, if the mass media almost uniformly hates you, that makes me more inquisitive to find out what you're actually about and what the reasons are that they seem to be so much against you. There's no polarity whatsoever with the mainstream national media. They're almost all uniformly against Donald Trump, other than Fox News, of course. But at the end of the day, we know that the political system, the political paradigm, is just meant to act as another agency of distraction for the masses at large. With Barack Obama, it was on the super liberal aspect. With Donald Trump, it's on the entertainment aspect.
It's not an overreaction. They needed to cover the statue, and as far as I'm concerned, you shouldn't be playing her rendition of "God Bless America." It's not to sit up there and denigrate her. Whatever these lyrics were and the things that she was spewing outside of that song was in the 1930s and 1940s. It was clearly a different time, but a highly sensitive time, especially back then as well.
Well, Stephen A. Smith, dare I say that if you were to attend a basketball game at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, you're going to hear music by the Notorious B.I.G., by Jay-Z. And if we're going to start to search through various songs and verses and lyrics for components of ideologies or beliefs or sentiments that we might find to be untoward at the very least, or maybe as far as to say offensive, we're going to have to start taking everybody off of various soundtracks and song listings, etc. Because I can rattle off some songs and some lyrics that Notorious B.I.G. stated out of his own mouth, that there's no way in the world that he should be getting nationally broadcast or having his music played for a large group of people who claim to be quote unquote conscious.
And I think what we need to recognize is the fact that, you know what, we can sit up there and we can talk about how our society has advanced and things are incredibly offensive as of now, but who's to say that it was not offensive back then? There were black people alive and living back then that were enduring far more racist things than we're subjected to, at least overtly, in this day and age.
Well, Stephen A. Smith, dare I say that, especially pertaining to your notion that so-called blacks from the 1930s were subjected to far more overt racism back then, don't you think that they were concerned with far more overt things and things of substance back then than some fat white bitch singing about pickaninnies or whatever song she was singing back then? I mean, it's just me, brothers. I don't care about what white people think. I don't care about what they're talking about. I just don't care. So it's very difficult for me to be that concerned with something that went on back in the 1930s. I do understand the validity of always being aware of the messages that are dispensed to the masses at large. That's very important. But to try to go back 90 years and reverse engineer certain energies and so on and so forth, the black people who lived back then, for the most part, are no longer alive today unless they're about 95 to 100 years old. We have to focus on what we need to do right now. There are still so-called black hoods all across America, and none of them are struggling because of Kate Smith. I promise you that.
And so when you take that into consideration and you listen to the lyrics of some of her songs, and then you recognize the fact that this is her and she is now associated with it, it would be one thing to have a problem with the song "God Bless America" just because she sang it. It's another thing entirely when you're looking at the individual that's singing that song.
So Stephen A. Smith, did you have an issue with Notorious B.I.G. on the song "Dead Wrong" when he talked about raping young girls? Did you have a problem with that? When he said that he liked some young, fresh and green with no hair in between, know what I mean?
There's plenty of people who sing that song. There are plenty of people who are capable of singing that song. Once it is revealed who she is, and you see some of the lyrics of some of the things that she has spewed in the past, like, for example, that's why darkies were born. Someone to pick the cotton, someone had to pick the corn, someone had to slave and be able to sing. When you are a so...
Well, I have news for you, Stephen A. Smith. There are a lot of There are a lot of people who still think that about so-called black people, especially so-called black men today. You know how we avert that, or you know how we controvert that sentiment? By no longer working for them, by only working with them when we're the ones who are going to gain a certain level of lucre or a certain level of profit from it, revenue from it. But our people, for the most part, are focused on forcing this mixture with the so-called white man and with the other races, which only leads to more disregard and disrespect, because as they state, for the most part, the vast majority of them do not like so-called black people. But because our people have such a poor self-image, we're always trying to force ourselves on these other races. This is a cultural issue. And the only way that this issue is going to be corrected, or the tide going to be stemmed, is for there to be a massive paradigm shift. And that's only going to happen through some type of calamity or cataclysm or what have you, where people are going to be forced, so-called black people are going to have to be forced to work together and not look at one another and think of negative things. Just think of necessities.
Associated with lyrics like that, then you're singing God Bless America and we know who you are. It's synonymous with you, and that's a problem. Now, if we didn't know who you are and we just heard you singing a song and you're the good luck charm for the Philadelphia Flyers as you had been for years, and you're synonymous with that song only, that would be a different ball game. But now the cat's out of the bag. Everybody knows exactly who she is, or who she was rather, because she passed away in 1986.
So now, brothers, did you hear that? This person, Kate Smith, passed away in 1986. We're now in 2019. So it's been approximately 33 years since this person passed away. So what should that tell you? That should tell you that this is some type of Masonic ritual or what have you, some Masonic ritual of societal correction. Because 33 years always represents enlightenment or illumination. Like in the film Us, there was a 33-year gap from when the young girl Adelaide was watching in television all the way to her re-emergence from the underworld.
Everybody knows what she's been synonymous with, which wasn't flattering to the African American community. And as a result, I think that you need to dismiss or remove yourself from that kind of association. So I have no problem with the Yankees, the Flyers, or anybody else refusing to play that rendition any longer, because to think about it,
I don't have a real problem with it either, but at the end of the day, that's not going to solve any of the issues that our people have. So once again, that's a two-dimensional thought process, and two-dimensional thinking never leads to solutions.
When she's singing it, is to ultimately think about the other things that we would rather not think about.
I don't think it's an overreaction, and I'm sensitive to this issue that nowadays the kind of PC culture run amok, especially as people who are groups of people who've been marginalized are coming into the mainstream. We're looking at our history and saying, well, wait a minute, a lot of our traditions that people like, just, through inertia, we've always done them, and then they become sentimental to us also. We don't like all this stuff changing. Yeah, but many groups were offended by a lot of the stuff that people find traditional and kind of warming to their heart, because
I have news for you, Max Kellerman. There are a lot of people who find a lot of things offensive. That's why I bring up that example of Notorious B.I.G., who's widely feted, especially here in the New York area in the 5 boroughs, particularly Brooklyn. If we were to start searching through his catalog, and he has a rather small catalog for someone who is as venerated as he is. He only made 2 real albums while he was alive. I promise you, and the vast majority of his material is going to be verses and lyrics that will be found, quote unquote, offensive. We know for a fact that most mainstream rappers today, especially from back in the quote unquote thug era of the mid to late 90s, early 2000s, they were told by record executives and record producers, even if they were not actual quote unquote thugs in real life, which most of them are not, they were told that you have to be a gangster rapper in order for us to sell you. So they were being engineered in the same way. Who knows? And I heard Jason Whitlock make this point on Speak for Yourself, because that's the first time that I heard about this issue. Even he stated that he believed that there was a possibility that maybe Kate Smith was prompted to sing those songs, even if she was, whether she was or she wasn't. It does not make a difference to me, because her singing that whatever quote unquote racist song that she sang back in the 1930s has nothing to do with what our people are dealing with today. The main problem that our people have today is that they're Luciferians. The vast majority of so-called black people are low-level Luciferians, or what they call liberals today.
Because they're used to it now. And yet I am sensitive to this idea, especially with social media nowadays. You can unearth controversies in people's past. And
yeah, you worried about that because you scared somebody going to see the footage of you calling so-called black people niggers. That's what you worried about.
And use that as a way to kind of
allegedly
erase them from our culture. So I get it. I get the sensitivity to it. This is not like Wagner, the composer, who was a notorious racist and anti-Semite, not listening to his music. That would be ridiculous, right? Because the music has intrinsic value, and his views were not part of his work, really. They were separate from that work. Or Leni Riefenstahl, the director, who made a Triumph of the Will about the Nazis. It was propaganda. And we don't need to celebrate the person in order to study the film and say, okay, here is film technique. Or even...
Once again, Max Kellerman, and we know that you like to style yourself as some type of rap aficionado and expert. You know and I know that we can go through so many catalogs of top rappers who are talking about shooting people, killing people, raping women, selling drugs. Once again, going back to Notorious B.I.G., he talked about his homeboy Gutter raping children and throwing them over the bridge. Right? That's what he stated. That's what Notorious B.I.G. stated. Now, some cats might say, well, you know, when Biggie said kidnap kids, he was talking about men. You don't know that. I don't know that. I have to go by what was stated in the lyric.
Even